Welcome to the Home Issues channel, and we begin. George occupied a two-person compartment, traveling in a luxury class carriage. The compartment consisted of two rooms, a living room bedroom and a sanitary hygiene room. He was traveling alone, and it was very convenient. No one bothered him. He could afford such a trip. Today he was heading to the city from which he left 3 years ago after a scandal. And now, sitting by the window, he recalled how it all happened. He first met Mary at a wedding, where he was a guest on the groom's side. Then his attention was drawn to a beautiful blue-eyed girl with blonde hair. She was the bride's maid of honor. He noticed that a tall young man, dressed in the latest fashion, was courting her. As everyone assumed, Mary was his girlfriend. But being naturally attentive and observant, George noticed they were not a couple. Therefore, he invited Mary for a few dances, during which he flirted with her. Smiles and harmless flirting turned into conversations, and without any expectations, George invited her on a date. Unexpectedly, Mary agreed. All this did not go unnoticed by the young man who had his eyes on Mary and was present at the wedding with his friends. During one musical break, George went to the men's restroom. There, a young man approached him with his friends and said in an insolent manner, "If you don't want to get hurt, then get out of here and leave Mary alone." The fight lasted a few seconds. George washed his hands and returned to the hall, where music started playing again. He danced with Mary once more. Her admirer did not return to the table. Later, the MC organized a series of contests in which both George and Mary participated. By this time, George was considered a desirable groom. He had started his own business, which brought him excellent profits and constantly expanded his enterprises. He owned several cafes, a wonderful hotel with a restaurant in the city center. Currently, he actively developed cargo and passenger transportation. The office of his main enterprise was located downtown, not far from the hotel. There was also a manager. George himself stayed in the shadows, although he fully controlled the operations of the enterprise he created. After meeting at the wedding, Mary and George began dating. He inquired about her companion at the wedding, to which Mary replied with laughter. He appeared before the friend's wedding. An acquaintance of the bride. Lived in our neighborhood at some point. Now moved to the regional center. Came to visit his grandmother, who lives near the bride's parents' cottage. But after the wedding, he disappeared somewhere. Probably went back home. Mary finished her studies and unexpectedly told George that she got a job at a construction firm, and the office was located downtown. Her friend Stacy also got a job there, at whose wedding they met. All this was unexpected because George wanted to hire her as an engineer in his office. But he knew the employees of the construction company and was friends with their founder. They discussed Mary's work with him, and he increased her salary, saying that he couldn't promote her higher in position. A year passed, and he proposed to Mary. They got married. Mary moved in to live with him. George didn't tell her that he owned a large business, although he hinted about the possibility of her transferring to work in the neighboring office. One day, the founder of the company where Mary worked warned George that he had hired someone named Kevin as the head of the department. They checked on him and found out that he constantly changed jobs due to an insatiable attraction to women. He skillfully flirted with them. As a rule, his affairs were uncovered, and he had to run away from jealous husbands, hence the constant job changes. But as a specialist, he was competent. George talked to Mary and warned her to stay away from Kevin. Nevertheless, George eventually learned that Kevin, having assessed the new team, made an attempt to court Mary. On that day, Kevin was found beaten up on the underground parking lot of the firm. He was also warned that he shouldn't flirt with married women in the office, and if he was seen near Mary again, he'd better leave town. Kevin seemed to heed the warnings and stopped chasing women in the office. Still, George warned Mary again about the need to keep her distance from Kevin, to which she replied, "Well, I can always complain to my brother about him, and his retaliation will be very serious. Ron walks a fine line doing protection rackets for businessmen. Bill, he has his own team which will do anything he demands, and under him, the whole city bows down. I don't know why you don't want to be friends with him. Mary, I prefer legal, lawful business. But you never say what you do in your office. I'm an economist and I work. And as a result, we have everything. A beautiful cottage. A car. We don't deny ourselves anything. We travel wherever you wish. One day, before New Year's, George went on a business trip. Not far, a 2 to 3 hours drive from the city. An important contract was being signed, and serious negotiations were expected. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he called Mary and asked, "How are things with you?" "Everything is fine. One more hour of work and we're going home." "When will you arrive?" "Approximately around 10 p.m., since the negotiations haven't started yet, and there are many issues they might want to discuss." "Good. I'll be home by 5:30. And do you have a day off tomorrow?" "Yes, a day off." "Excellent. Let's go skating." "All right, I love you. And sorry, the battery is dying. I need to change the phone. Let's buy you an iPhone at the shopping mall. Modern ones." Everything didn't go as George planned. The other side's lawyer appeared and placed already signed documents on the table. Practically, George was free and could go home. No questions arose. He got into the car, handed the documents to his lawyer Roger, and they drove back. On the way, George instructed Roger on what he wanted to do. Essentially, he had bought a number of service stations in the district. Around 7 in the evening, he dropped Roger off near his house and arrived home. The cottage was dark, although, as Mary claimed, she should have been home. He opened the door, walked into the house. Since his phone had completely died, he picked up the home phone and dialed Mary's number. Unexpectedly, her friend Stacy answered. "Hello, I'm listening." "Who is this? And who am I speaking with?" "I'm George, Mary's husband." "Where is she?" "Oh, she's dancing with Kevin right now. And she left her phone on the table." "Where are you?" "We're at the restaurant, at the Central Hotel." "I see. The hotel and restaurant belong to me and are nearby." In 20 minutes, without changing clothes, he entered the hall and witnessed his wife dancing the gypsy dance with Kevin to applause. During the dance, they circled around and came close to him. Mary saw her husband and wanted to say something. At that moment, Kevin, still dancing, suddenly stood in front of her, winked at George. And that was a mistake. George's fist hit Kevin squarely in the head. From the blow, he fell into a deep knockout and collapsed onto the floor. The music stopped. Men standing nearby intervened and pushed George away from Kevin. A minute later, George was detained by the police, and 10 minutes later, he was taken to the station. What happened in the restaurant afterward, George neither knew nor cared about. He spent the night in temporary detention, was taken to court in the morning, and the duty judge sentenced him to 15 days for hooliganism. The judge said, "You're lucky, young man, the victim didn't file a complaint, but you still haven't explained why you hit him. Your Honor, it says right there in the case file, out of hooligan motives." "All right. I think 15 days will be enough for you to reflect on your behavior. Guards, bring in the next one." Returning to the temporary detention facility, George asked the superintendent to let him speak with his lawyer. Roger arrived an hour later, brought him a blanket and some food parcel. They were given a chance to talk. George arranged with Roger to meet in 10 days. He asked him, "Roger, buy me a new phone. My battery died, and I have the right to make phone calls according to the daily schedule, from 10 to 12 and from 7 to 9 p.m., and move my car from the parking lot at the restaurant to the cottage. What will you do next?" "Roger, I have plenty of time to think. They don't even take us out to clean the snow here. And that wouldn't have hurt you. You know, I warned that bastard of what would happen if I saw him near my wife, and he still winked at me. So, I closed that eye for him." "Yeah, and there's another problem. After he was released from the police station, Patrol FSB found him unconscious and quite badly beaten. He's currently in trauma care. I had nothing to do with it. I was in the lockup at that time, so I have an alibi. Thanks for the blanket." "You're welcome. I'll buy you a phone today and deliver it. Call if anything." That's how his detention began. The 15 days dragged on. During this time, he unexpectedly received a parcel from his wife. George refused to accept the parcel and returned it unopened, along with the attached letter, which he didn't read. He explained to the police officer, "Tell her I don't need anything. But she's currently with the superintendent of the temporary detention facility, trying to meet with you. And I won't meet with her. I won't come out of my cell for a visit with her." The superintendent came and said, "Listen, your wife is very upset. Do you know who her brother is? I know. Especially consider the whole city walks under him. I don't walk under him. That's because you're related to him. And how do you plan to live in the same city with him? Superintendent. I definitely don't plan to live with him. As for the city, that can be changed. Tell me, when will I be released from the detention facility? Is it that important? I want to plan everything. You will be released at 10 a.m. That's perfect. On the same day, George called Roger and said, "Pick me up from the detention center. Prepare a room in our hotel. From my office, in the second room, bring me rotarums and clean shirts. For the second half of the day, book train tickets to the regional center. I think it's time to move to the next level." And what about here? Here I have a manager. I will entrust the control over his work to you, and I will monitor through remote access myself. And what to do in the regional center? To start with, I'll consolidate. Yes, you'll disappoint the local elite. In what sense? After the scandal in the restaurant, an article about you appeared in the local newspaper. So that's what you're like, Mr. X. And what is it about? Nobody knew that you are one of the richest people in the district. Well, I'm leaving just in time. When George was released from the temporary detention center, a car was waiting at the gates with Roger inside. He took him to the hotel. George washed up, changed, had lunch. On the go, he learned the news of the city and the district, and after lunch, by taxi, he went to the station to catch the train. The next morning, he was in the regional center. There, he began creating a new business. He contemplated the idea while in detention. His business in the district also flourished and brought in decent profits. After 6 months, he began building a new house. Over 2 years, he solidified his position in the region, and then the plant in the district center, from which he left, came into view. After preliminary negotiations, which lasted about a year, he managed to significantly lower the price. And so, leaving a new manager in the region, he went to the district center. All these 3 years, he often remembered his wife, who remained living there. He loved her, but he didn't try to contact her, although it would have been simple to do so since she still lived in their cottage. In the morning, the train pulled up to the platform. George got out of the carriage, got into a taxi, and arrived at his hotel. There he settled on the top floor. After half an hour, the manager came to him, and they discussed the problems of the business in the district for a long time. Then they discussed the upcoming negotiations with the administration regarding the purchase of the factory. Closer to noon, Roger showed up, and after discussing all the issues, they went to meet. Despite the preliminary agreements reached, the negotiations were tough, but ultimately, the papers were signed with minor reservations. Around 7 p.m., George returned to the hotel. After changing, he went to the restaurant. He sat at a table in the corner. A smiling waitress brought him the menu. After flipping through it, George placed an order and waited. He looked out the window and unexpectedly felt someone sit at his table. He turned and saw his wife's brother Ron, nicknamed Sailor, who said, "Hi, Mr. Ten." "Hello, Sailor. Long time no see. About 3 years. Not about exactly 3 years. It was hard to find you. I wasn't hiding. I just left." "Yeah, I know. I was informed about your arrival today. So I decided to meet with you, though I'm a busy man. I'm aware of your activities. And how are you? Haven't been caught yet? Should I be? You should know best. You see, in my activities, I act according to the principle of Ostap Bender. And what's that? As he once said to Ron, I'm certainly not a cherubim. I don't have wings, but I respect the criminal code. It's my weakness. More than that, I carefully read this very code. And among other principles, remember how Bender cracked millionaire Karaiko. All the money went to him. And he didn't rob or kill. Right, he blackmailed him. Did you also create a horns and hooves office and appoint a chairman for taking the fall? I have a very serious office, providing a whole range of services, and everything is legal. But I want to talk to you about something else. I want to talk to you about Mary. What is there to talk about? Tell me, why did you treat Mary like that? And generally, what happened 3 years ago? Didn't you ask her? She said she was at fault herself and forbade me to look for you. But you still looked? I understood that this guy you knocked out was to blame. and I asked the boys to bring him to me for a conversation. But they misunderstood me, and when they invited him, they overdid it and put him in the hospital. Is he still there? No. He laid low for about 10 days, then ran off from the hospital in the city. I never got to talk to him. So if Mary doesn't want to tell you anything, why do you think I'll tell you something? I don't know, but I hope so. Mary still lives alone, doesn't meet anyone. Occasionally, Stacy visits her with her husband, but mostly, she stays in your house. I asked her what she plans to do next, to which she said, "First I'll talk to George, and only then decide." Don't you think it's time to talk? I don't know, I have nothing to say to her. But she does. You probably stayed at this hotel? Do you want to drop by my place? And not alone. With Mary? And not only with her. I need to think about it. And while you're thinking, will you leave again? No. My plans include staying in this city for a while, and it's not cheap to live in a hotel. This is my hotel, as well as this restaurant. That's great. Bill, I invite you to my celebration tomorrow. You mean your birthday? Have to remember. I remember that your birthday is still a week away. I thought so too, but it turns out I was born yesterday. But due to a registrar's error, the birth certificate at the Zags lists the date a week later. And this is a reason for me to celebrate my birthday twice. Come tomorrow to the banquet hall of the restaurant. Will Mary be there too? Yes, I'll invite her. And I think you'll learn a lot of new things. But those aren't my secrets anymore. Meanwhile, you'll talk. Or are you a weakling? I mean, a person who is weak and spineless, broken by an incomprehensible situation, so much so that you've lost the ability to think, and you're afraid to face the problem head-on. Am I a weakling? I'm a businessman who achieved success on my own. Yes, in life I've been called many things, and if it was an insult, my offenders paid for it. I'll meet with Mary and listen to her. Agreed. I'll see you tomorrow. At 6 p.m. After dinner, George went up to his room. When he was going there, he was unexpectedly stopped by the guards and asked, "Sir, who are you, and what are you doing on this floor?" "Actually, I live here." "What's the problem?" "Somehow we don't quite believe you." "Show us your guest card." "I don't need it. It's enough that I have a key card for the room." "And you live in the presidential suite? And is there a presidential suite here?" "No. That's just what we call it between us. The room indicated on your key card costs more than your monthly salary." "And how did you assess that?" "Well, based on your Rajram. Call the head of security. Maybe call the police right away?" George saw that the guards were ready to use force and didn't wait for that. Within a few minutes, both security representatives were lying on the floor. George went into the room and from there called Roger, asking, "Roger, sorry to bother you so late. I'd like to get some information about Ron Saylor. An interesting character, as far as I know. He's your wife's brother, whom you haven't divorced yet. He pretty much ruled the roost here until you left, but he didn't bother us much. After the article about you came out, about Mr. X, he quieted down regarding our businesses, although I know that the manager made payments to him." "Who else did he make payments to?" "Well, you saw all that. The money went towards maintaining your cottage. But I didn't live there. That's something you should discuss with the manager, although I'd rather you didn't bother him for now. He's sick. Maybe we should change managers?" "No, we won't find a better one." "All right. Let's talk more about the sailor. And what's next?" He quieted down and opened a legitimate office. He was repeatedly checked by regulatory bodies, but everything was clean. He provides various kinds of services. And what's this sudden interest in him? He invited me to his birthday party tomorrow. And what's going to happen? I don't know, but my wife Mary will be there too. How can I help? I understand that you need a gift for the sailor. Where will the celebration be held? In the banquet hall of our restaurant. At least you won't have to go far. Got it. And here's what. Warn our security. Otherwise they'll start questioning me, like who I am and what I'm doing here. But they just don't know who you are, and the floor is elite. Exactly. The floor is elite, and asking questions when I open the door with my key is tactless. If the security keeps bothering the guests like this, we'll lose them. And what if I'm with a woman? Or if I invite someone to my room to talk? Are they going to check my documents? And here's what I think. Soon security will come to me. I roughed them up a bit in the hallway. Tell them that the guards are fired. Did they attack you? They tried to stop me. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. George said, "Open." A man entered who introduced himself. "Good evening, I'm the head of security. Come in. And please ask those young men to wait in the corridor. You violated the rules of staying in the hotel and did not comply with the legitimate requirements of the staff. I've already given the order to fire these two. Do you want to follow them? But you don't have a guest card. That's because I'm not a guest. This hotel belongs to me. As the head of security, you should know that this room is reserved only for the company's founder. Or has someone else lived here? Where is this visible? And couldn't you go to reception and ask?" The head of security's phone rang. He answered, listening. After a very brief conversation, he apologized and left George's room. The next day, in the morning, George reviewed his wardrobe and concluded that it was time to update it. For this purpose, he went to the shopping. After a series of purchases, he returned to the hotel. The guards on the floor no longer asked him who he was. In the room, George unpacked the purchased clothes. At this time, he called Roger and invited him to take a ride and look at the factory he purchased yesterday. George agreed but said that he needed to organize the new clothes, as he planned to wear them to the restaurant in the evening. Roger said, "Bill, leave everything in the room and go to the parking lot. The clothing issue will be resolved." "Understood." George left the items as he was instructed, and, thinking, put some money on top with a note attached. Payment for organizing the clothes. Went downstairs, told Roger about the money. He called someone and said, "The girls were left with money. I know they won't take it, but make sure it reaches them." Arrived at the factory. There was nothing to see. George knew this because he had long had photos of the dilapidated enterprise, once advanced, supplying its products, including abroad. Asked Roger, "Tell me, how quickly can we start production here?" "In about 6 months. Though I'll say, separate workshops can start working under reconstruction conditions." "And is the reconstruction project ready?" "We're making it ourselves. In the region." "Yes, I know. I'm interested in what stage the project is at. It's already undergoing approval." "And how long?" Ask the sailor. His firm contracted to push these approvals through. And they have serious connections. In our city, they'll sign whatever they bring. Such a serious firm? No. That's how much everyone is afraid of them everywhere. And here's what. I understood that you were invited to meet with the sailor for his birthday? Yes. And what? Shouldn't I go? I didn't say that. You shouldn't quarrel with him. Since he invited you, go. Just keep your distance. And remember, the entire meeting will be under police control. Does the sailor know this? He even knows who from his circle leaks information about him. Return to the hotel. All his shirts and Rogerams, neat and perfectly ironed, hung in the closet. George went to the shower, where he stood under hot scalding water for a long time. After steaming, he turned on the cold water. Then he thoroughly dried himself with a large terry towel. He stepped out of the shower. Another 10 minutes later, he looked at himself in the big mirror. Before him stood a magnificent man in a perfectly tailored Rogeram, with a touch of gray at the temples, which adorned him. Recalled lines from a poem, clipped according to the latest fashion, dressed like a London dandy. And finally saw the light. Noted to himself, "Good thing I got a haircut when I was driving from the region here. It's time to go to the restaurant." Picked up the gift bought on his behalf and went downstairs. To get to the banquet hall, you had to cross the main restaurant hall, though there was also a separate entrance. George, unhurriedly, walked through the hall, recalling how his wife had danced wildly here with Kevin 3 years ago. How he hit that suitor who exploded, and how he ended up lying on the dance floor. He also recalled how he was arrested for the assault, and he served 15 days. His father raised him, and it was his father who instilled in him that family should be based on trust. Only then can harmony be achieved in the relationship between husband and wife, and thus love. Unfortunately, his father struggled with this. First, his mother betrayed him, running away from home with some boyfriend. 4 years later, his father met, as he thought, a worthy woman, and married her. Literally 3 months later, She started cheating on him. When his father found out, he simply broke down. Nevertheless, George loved his father very much. And once, seeing his father crying because his new wife brought her lover into the house, George grabbed a chain from a chainsaw and hit the man 3 times on the head. The man lay bleeding profusely on the floor and spent a month in the hospital. That's when he was arrested for the first time in his life, but was soon released, since George hadn't reached the age of 14 and wasn't criminally responsible. Returning home, he announced to his stepmother that he intended to kill her before he turned 14. That same day, she fled the house. He never met her again. It was at that time that his grandmother died, and they sold the house in the city where they lived and moved here with his father. His father died 3 years later, turning into a broken shell of a man. Because of what he had to endure in childhood, George decided that no woman would treat him the way his mother and stepmother treated his father. Being naturally talented, he was passionate about mathematics, and when the time came, he chose the economics faculty of the university. There, he seriously took up boxing and fought quite well. He didn't intend to forgive Mary. The deception was obvious to him. She said she was going home, and she promised not to approach Kevin. And what she did was unacceptable to him. He didn't even want to talk to her about it, but Mary's brother called him a coward for avoiding meeting her. And that was rather insulting to him. He understood, she's his sister, and he would defend her. Ron talked to his sister and told her, "Mary, George is in town." "And what? Is he coming home?" "He's staying at his hotel, from which he was taken to the police 3 years ago." "Is this his hotel?" "Yes, this is his hotel. And I think it's precisely because of this that he hasn't divorced you yet. Understands that he will lose a lot in the division of property." "No, Ron. Bill is not like that. He just loves me. I want to meet him and talk, and so that no one bothers us. I made a stupid mistake then. I should have, after we congratulated you with Stacy, just left, but we stopped in the restaurant hall, invited by Kevin. Worst of all, I even started dancing, though by that time I should have already been home. Will you help me?" "Mary, I invited George to my birthday and warned him that you would be there, and that you need to talk. Did he agree?" "Not immediately, but I asked him what he was afraid of." "And what did he say?" "He said that he's not a coward and is ready to meet with you." "How do you imagine this?" "You will have a separate table, aside. You will be able to talk. Only I can't leave for long. You resolve that with him." Mary was nervous before meeting George. She wanted this meeting and waited for it, but she didn't know what he would say. After he got out of detention and didn't return home, she called her brother. He mobilized his assistants, but they couldn't find George. At his workplace, they said he had left, and no one knew where he was. And then an article came out in the local newspaper stating that a local oligarch was jailed for 15 days. This information was a surprise to her. She considered George an ordinary economist working at a successful company, and he never discouraged her from this belief. His workplace had a pass system, and to get to him, you had to call. Then he would come down and personally escort her to his office. She had been in his office a few times. It was a small, tidy office where he sat alone. There was a computer, and papers lay on a large desk. On the same floor was the company manager's office. And finally, she noticed George entering the banquet hall. He took the shortest path to Ron, a gift in hand. Congratulated him. It was evident that he hadn't noticed Mary sitting aside, who had already congratulated her brother. During the conversation, Ron nodded his head, indicating where George should go. He turned and locked eyes with Mary. Ron explained, "Mary is already seated, nervous. And you're almost late." "Not true. I arrived on time." "Well, are you going to talk to Mary, or are you scared?" "I'll talk. By the way, tell me about the progress of the documentation for the factory I bought. Your people were supposed to approve the project, so it was you who bought it. I was breaking my head over it, though I could have guessed, but your manager is in the hospital, and I didn't give him the authority to make this deal. I bought the factory, not him. Tell me, do you believe this will bring you profit?" "Ron, I'm an economist, and I've calculated everything. So, get your people moving. I needed this yesterday." "Well, you're a brazen one. Yesterday you signed the purchase agreement, and today you're already planning to make a profit." All right, go talk to Mary. I'll resolve your issue tomorrow. It's in progress. George finished the conversation, turned and headed to the table where Mary was sitting. He noted for himself that the table was slightly aside and set for two. On the table were champagne and cognac. At this moment, a text message arrived. He read it on the go. SWAT teams have arrived. Apparently there will be a raid. George turned around, approached Ron and whispered, SWAT teams have arrived. Keep that in mind. Don't worry about me. After this, George quickly walked to Mary's table, sat on the free chair and said, Good evening. Hello, Bill. It took you a long time to reach me. How are you? Is that why you called me? Sorry. I want to talk to you about that day. I'm listening. Meanwhile, George noticed that Ron disappeared. Several others disappeared too. Without rushing, he took out his phone and deleted the received SMS. Mary beckoned to the waiter and asked him to open the champagne. It was evident that she was nervous. The waiter, after pouring champagne for her, asked George, Would you like champagne? Or cognac? George, anticipating that there would be an assault, answered, Thank you, I'll pour myself when I decide. George was right. Barely had Mary started talking when special forces in uniform burst into the hall and demanded, Everyone lie down, don't move. George said to Mary, I'm not going to lie down on the floor. The senior special forces officer approached him and asked, Why aren't you following the special forces orders? This is because I didn't lie down on the floor. And what is this? A hostage rescue, or the capture of a particularly dangerous criminal? This is none of your business. Show me your documents. They're in my room. I don't see the need to carry my documents for a dinner with my wife. Can you identify yourself? No problem. I'm George Ivanovich, the owner of this restaurant and hotel. I currently live in my room on the top floor. This is my wife, Mary. Further discussions will be conducted through my lawyer. And where is he? Lawyer? Here he is. Meet Roger. The operation leader glanced around. Roger approached, asking, I want to see just one paper. Who authorized this operation, and on what grounds? The special forces left the banquet hall of the restaurant, but the festivities were ruined. Guests gradually began to leave the premises. George called over the waiter and said, Please bring dinner for 3 to the room on the top floor. Add this champagne and cognac. Bill, excuse me. I still need to deal with the special forces. And I promised my wife to come home early. All right. If anything, I'll call you. Roger headed for the exit. George said to Mary, Let's go to my place. Somewhere we must talk. Mary obediently got up. They went to the hotel lobby and took the elevator to the floor occupied by George. They entered the room. After a few minutes, the waiter arrived, delivering dinner to the room, as well as champagne and cognac. After he left, George poured himself cognac and Mary champagne. After waiting a little, George asked, What did you want to say? Why did we meet? I wanted to tell you what happened 3 years ago. And what happened? That day was Friday, and I had a shortened workday. Stacy and I left the office. At this time, Ron pulled up and invited us to the restaurant briefly, for his real birthday. Stacy and I agreed, but we agreed not to stay more than an hour. He also motivated it by wanting to see someone from his relatives among the guests. And no one else from relatives? You know that we are the only ones left. They settled in the banquet hall, drank a little, talked, and Stacy and I decided to go home. But we had to exit through the main dining hall. This is what I know now. There are 2 other exits from the hall. And when did you find this out? I found out then. But let's continue in order. When we were walking through the hall, we ran into Kevin. He was sitting at a table with friends. He was delighted to see us. It was about 8 o'clock. Despite our persistence, he seated us at the table. Shortly thereafter, the band began playing a gypsy tune. Stacy didn't have time to tell me that you called. She said that later, when we were sorting everything out. Kevin invited me to dance again. I warned Stacy that after this dance we were leaving. When we were finishing the dance, you appeared and floored Kevin. In the commotion, one of Ron's friends, who happened to be there, led me and Stacy out through the back exit, brought us our coats from the cloakroom. He said, Girls, get out of here. You can't help George anymore, and we'll try. And why didn't they help me? You were quickly taken to the station and they just didn't have time. At least Kevin didn't file a complaint against you. What did he say to you? Nothing. I never saw Kevin again. He didn't show up and was fired for absenteeism. Brother said he ended up in the hospital, recovered, and fled. What happened to him? I don't know, I didn't clarify that. I tried to meet with you myself when you were serving your 15 days. But unfortunately you refused to see me. You didn't even accept the parcel I brought you. You didn't read my letter either. It was returned unopened. I was fine. Roger provided me with everything I needed. But Roger didn't tell me where you were. We thought you were in the city. Ron couldn't even think that you would start a new business somewhere else. Did you ask him to find you? Yes. Who else could I turn to? All this time, I was waiting for them to bring me a summons to court for a divorce. Are you still working there? Of course. And are you living in our cottage? You didn't evict me. And the cottage was built during our marriage. Mary's phone rang. After listening to what they said, she replied, I understand everything. I'm on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up and said to George, I've told you everything I wanted to say. Now you need to decide what to do next. And where are you hurrying to? I need to go home. What? Is a man waiting for you? You could say that. However, you can come with me and meet him. Do you think it's convenient? I think it's convenient. All right, I'll go. George called Roger and asked, Do you happen to have a standby car here? I figured as much. Come out to the street, a car will pull up to the main entrance, George asked Mary. Maybe take the cognac with us? He doesn't drink. They got dressed, went downstairs, and went outside. The snow was quietly falling. Near the main entrance stood a car. They got in and drove off. 20 minutes later, they arrived at their cottage. The lights were on. The driver stayed to wait, and George and Mary went inside. They were met by a young woman who said, Mary, I apologize, of course, but he absolutely refuses to go to bed without his mom. He's incredibly stubborn. Of course, Amanda, you can go. It's already late. Please explain to me what's going on. Nothing. My son doesn't want to go to bed without me. Your son? And who's the father? And what do you think? And how old is he? 2 years and almost 3 months. And why didn't you tell me about this? Why did Ron keep quiet? I asked Ron not to tell you anything. The girl, do you have far to go? Quite far. There's a car waiting. Tell the driver that George ordered him to take you home, and after that he should return to the garage. Bill, are you staying here? Yes, there's a guest room here. They went upstairs and entered the children's room, which had been converted from his study. There, sitting on the bed in pajamas, was a boy. He joyfully exclaimed, Mom, you're here. Aunt Amanda said you'd be late. As you can see, I'm back, so let's get you to bed. Are we going to Uncle Ron's tomorrow? Why? It's his birthday. His birthday is today, and he'll come to us tomorrow. And who is this uncle? I don't know yet. I'll tell you in the morning. Go to sleep. Mary turned on the nightlight, kissed her son, and left the bedroom with George. They went downstairs. Mary set out some snacks and 2 brandy glasses on the table. She said, Bill, I know I haven't told you everything. I'm afraid I haven't told you the most important thing. So, what haven't you told me? I've been thinking about what happened. I am guilty before you. I unintentionally deceived you. I could have easily left the restaurant. It would have been enough for me to say something to my brother, and Kevin's whole gang would have been thrown out. But I arrogantly thought I could handle the situation. Well, it sort of turned out that way. But you showed up earlier. I shouldn't have gone to the restaurant at all, and certainly not danced with Kevin. Besides, you warned me about him. Shall we drink? Sure. George asked. You haven't told me our son's name. Sorry. There were so many events today. The restaurant, meeting you, the encounter with the special forces. I named the boy George. So now he is George, just like his father. Now it's up to you to decide what to do, whether to live with us or without us. I am guilty before you, and ask for another chance for our family. George went to sleep in the guest room. Mary went up to the bedroom on the 2nd floor. In the middle of the night, someone rang the doorbell, and George opened it. On the threshold stood a drunk Ron. "Hello. I figured you'd be here. Let's have a drink." "Well, I see you've already had some." "But it's my birthday. I saw that even the special forces came to congratulate me." "I took care of that. Someone tipped off the police that there would be wanted people at my birthday party. Though I did ask what that team was doing, faces down on the ground. And what did they say?" "They apologized, saying it was a mistake." "And how many people did they detain?" "No one. For some reason they apologized to the MC and left." "What? You tell me, did you see the boy?" "For about 3 minutes, while they were putting him to bed. Mary is strict about that." "And why didn't you tell me anything?" "I said those aren't my secrets." Mary entered the kitchen, saw her brother, and asked, "So, what keeps you awake?" "Mary, don't get mad. I was passing by and decided to drop in." "At 2 in the morning? Passing by? You live 5 kilometers away from me." "Well, I felt like taking a little walk. And besides, 5 kilometers isn't a detour for a rabid dog." "All right, let's have a drink, and then I'll go to sleep in the guest room. That's where George is sleeping. And he might as well go up to the bedroom on the 2nd floor." "And why do you think we can sleep in the same bed?" "Because George is a real man." In the end, after weighing everything, George returned to Mary to her delight. Their son George was the happiest of all, proudly telling everyone that he and his dad had the same name, though he didn't understand the significance of what was happening. Mary knew that the name George translates from Latin as victor, but knowing her husband's character, she remembered that he brooded over any grievances for a long time and never forgot them. Therefore, she never gave him another reason to be jealous, because she cherished their family. Ron continued to run his company, getting involved in various disputes and resolving contentious issues. But he conducted his business under the guidance of an experienced lawyer whom he hired on George's advice.